So it goes without saying that fighting games are best enjoyed when playing with other people, whether it be locally, online, sometimes with friends or tournaments. Fighting games truly shine when it's just you and your opponent going at it to see who's the better player. But what do you do when you're tired of playing versus matches for the time being? Well, then it looks like you're stuck with fighting game single player content, and depending on the game, you've got a number of options. You can mess around in arcade mode, check out art galleries, play a visual novel, go fishing, and so on. However, one single player mode that I always look forward to whenever I play a new fighting game is the trial mode. Trial modes or mission modes like these are pretty common in most fighting games nowadays, where you pick a character and the game gives you a particular set of missions asking you to complete the displayed combo and maybe try to finish them off. Most of the time, each game will give you either some form of in-game currency for completing each character's trials or just an achievement or title of some sort. I personally find combo trials to be one of the most interesting modes in modern fighting games, because it's not just a matter of completing each trial presented to you, but it's also interesting getting to compare and contrast these modes in different games and see how they stack up. A lot of fighting games have some very challenging combo trials, but the way that each respective game goes about taking the player through each character's trials can make the difficulty curve more manageable. This video is meant to sort of highlight mission modes in a bunch of different fighting games, talk about what features make them more interesting, compare and contrast how certain games handle them, which ones did it the best and worst, and so on. I want this to be more of a fun, if elaborate, examination on combo trial modes in a bunch of different fighting games, just because I played so many of them I want to talk about them. With all that said, let's just begin. Now, the first thing I like to do whenever I'm trying out a game's combo trials is to see what kind of options I have in terms of how I want the information to be displayed to me. Things like player input display, whether I want to see the name of the move or its input, demonstrations of the trial being presented, or even what buttons I want to see displayed. Options like these not only allow the player to adjust the displayed information to suit their preference, but it can also aid in making the combos displayed to become easier to read and understand for players. Input history is obviously very useful in showing you whether or not you're performing each move correctly. If the special move or super isn't coming out, it's probably because you're hitting down and forward, but not down forward, kind of letting you know that you need to be more careful and have more precise inputs. Demos are pretty self-explanatory, wherein the game simply plays out the combo for you to give you a visual understanding of what you should be doing. By itself, this helps a lot, especially when it comes to players who might find the displayed combo sequence to be too intimidating at first glance, or if you're trying to figure out when to time certain moves within the combo. I'm sure some players might see it as cheating, since the game is essentially showing you the solution to each combo, but I feel it's important to have a visual aid for these, especially when certain games can have very complex looking combo notations. Demos also become even more useful if they utilize input display as well, letting the player gauge when they should be pressing each button or if the combo uses certain techniques that isn't explicitly told to you. How the hell am I supposed to do Baiken's IAD Tatami in this scenario, for example? Well, like this. Simple, right? Kinda? BlazBlue also has a neat little feature within its combo trials where the game can play audible beeps every time a button is pressed during a combo. This further helps players recognize the rhythm of each combo better and helps them know when they should be hitting each button. I personally find the beeps a little too distracting, however they are a great way to help players recognize how to time their moves. Notation display and button display also fall in line as nice quality of life options that allow the player to more easily understand what's being asked of them. Only showing the names of special moves and supers just forces new players to frequently go into the command list to understand what moves they're supposed to be doing. Displaying the inputs for each move allows the player to more easily recognize what they should be doing within each combo. Plus it helps that a lot of players will describe their moves by their input or function over their actual name anyways. You're not going to hear players or commentators go, "Yo, he opened up using the unencumbered mind." Thankfully, most modern fighting games have these features within their combo trial modes, and they're very helpful in easing the player into the trials that are being offered, while also letting the player personally decide how they want the information presented to them. Besides letting the player customize how they want their information presented to them, lots of fighting games will often let the player customize other more superficial aspects to make the combo trials more enjoyable, or at the very least less mind-numbing. Lots of fighting games will give you the option to select your character color. In fact, most trial modes that use the actual character select screen let you choose your color for the trials. Can't believe I've never noticed that until now. Some anime games like Guilty Gear or BlazBlue will even go a step beyond and allow you to change the stage you play on or the music that's playing, which is great. Even if I get stuck on some of these trials, I can at least take a break to bask in my environment, or to jam out to Divide My Heart for the 600th time. Now obviously these options don't serve a functional purpose, as in the music you play or the color you rock doesn't give the player a greater insight as to how each trial should be accomplished, but they're not supposed to. These options are there to let the player express themselves and allows them to set up these trials in a way that suits them. Now there's ultimately nothing wrong with having most combo trials take place in the training stage. It makes sense thematically after all. Come on, that's boring. I don't want to fight in the grid, I want to fight in the stage that's a dinosaur in the background. All I'm saying is that giving the player more choices before the trials even start can lead to a more enjoyable experience, for a bit at least. Alright, now I should actually probably start talking about the trials themselves now. So no matter what game you're playing, the premise is pretty much the same. Pick your character, go through a select number of missions that gradually increase in difficulty until you finish them all. Although the general premise is universal, each game has their own way to go about this, whether it be from the number of missions the game wants you to go through, or the way the game structures the missions themselves. Games like Marvel and SF4 had the first couple trials teach you special moves. KOF and Uni start you off by doing hit confirms into special moves, and games like Dragon Ball and BB Tech start you off by doing auto combos. Hell, some games like Guilty Gear and Granblue will have the special moves for a character be their own section before easing you into the beginner trials proper. Each of these methods, while different, are fine for each game they're used in, since they're meant to ease the player in with simple strings and attacks before revving up the difficulty or adding in more system mechanics. When it comes to the combos that you're asked to perform when in these try modes, you might ask yourself if the combos the game's teaching you are actually worth learning or viable enough to use in an actual match. Now, I can't speak for every game obviously, but I don't think each game is specifically trying to show you the most optimal combo you can perform in any situation. I think try modes like these should be taken not so much as tutorials, but rather as insights into a character's toolkit or potential in the game. I'm not expecting these games to teach me how to do TAC infinites or TODs or whatever, but I want combo trials to open my eyes as to what I can do with any given character, planting the seeds in your head that make you go, hey, that was kind of cool, but what if I did that move at this point in the combo? What if I added this move in the middle of the combo, or maybe did this to try to squeeze some more damage out of it? How can I use this move any other way besides how the game showed me? That's one of the most fun and interesting parts of fighting games to me, the discovery process and eureka moment you have when you make a cool combo or try to make the most out of your character's tools. And if these combo trials can do that at the very least, just plant those seeds of creativity, that's all I'm really asking for. Of course, you could have that same discovery process by living these characters in training mode or just by playing actual matches, but still doesn't hurt to give combo trials a shot anyway. Devs already made them for you, might as well see what they have cooked up. A lot of these trials can be boiled down to glorified execution checks though, and not trying to impart much onto a player other than, hey, look at this shit, you can only get on counter hit with all your resources on deck. I don't have a problem with these either, since they're still showing you what's possible with your character, just in a more niche situation. Like, it's not super practical to expect a counter hit anti-air with bullet while I have level 2 heat and I'm close to the corner. Or maybe it is, I don't know, I don't really play CF. But hey, this combo, while not super feasible in a lot of situations, still feels fun and can reward the players for looking out for that scenario. Any combo that requires you to spend all of your resources is usually not going to be super practical, but it can be fun to flex your fingers a bit and just see what kind of shit these characters can do. Lord knows I'm not going to hit any of these Aku combos in an actual match, but damn if they aren't fun to land. I also noticed an interesting quirk about a lot of these combo trials. More often than not, if a brand new fighting game launches with a trial mode, the missions presented will be relatively easy. Whereas if an already established fighting game gets a trial mode added as part of a version update or collector release, then the trials might be a lot more challenging. I assume this is likely because when the devs are updating an older game, they've already seen the player meta evolve with their game and have a good understanding of each character's strengths and weaknesses, as well as player tendencies. Games like Under Night, Rev 2, and KOF 13 all have some very involved trials for their characters, and I think that's because trial modes were added in later, when players had already had their hands on the games for a bit, thus giving the devs insight as to how to challenge those players. Newer fighting games don't have that luxury, so the combo trials for games like Melted Blood type Lumina, Granblue, and Dragon Ball don't feel nearly as challenging. Hell, Guilty Gear Strive didn't even launch with any sort of trial mode at all, they would just spawn that job to us later. This isn't always the case, obviously. SF6 has some pretty challenging advanced trials for Viper, Guile, and Blanca. City of the Wolves trials were simple at launch, but then they actually patched in more difficult trials with future updates, which I can get down with. 2XKO apparently has some difficult trials for characters like Caitlyn, but I'm just gonna have to take their word for that. I haven't touched that game. However, that's not to say that simpler combo trials are a bad thing, because as I said earlier, I don't think you should look at combo trials as how-to guides for your character, where they show you the most optimal combos for any given situation for only the most professional players to master. But they can simply be viewed as a way to open the player's eyes to a character's moves and tools. Even if the combos the game wants you to do aren't hard or complex, as long as the game is giving you situations where you can use each of your character's moves, then that's fine. Enemies jumping at you, anti-air them with a basic B&B. They throw on fireballs, use this move to go right through them. To sort of segue what I was saying about easier combo trials in more recent fighting games, I do want to highlight one game that tries to do something interesting with its trials in particular. Dragon Ball FighterZ combo trials themselves are nothing to write home about. Most of them are incredibly simple, only requiring the player to either mash a single attack button or perform very basic attack strings. Later seasons did add more characters whose trials were a little more complicated than earlier seasons, like having decent air B&B combos and things of that nature. But overall, these trials aren't going to make you break a sweat. Each character set of trials can be completed in less than a minute, and surprisingly, the game itself actually encourages this. So within the options of Dragon Ball's trial mode, you'll notice there's an option to show elapsed time. This will display a timer that shows you how long it takes to perform each trial presented to you, the game recording your fastest attempt for each one. With this option enabled, what were once seen as rudimentary and simple trials are now seen as a challenge to try to complete each trial as fast as possible. This is a very unique method to try to squeeze more enjoyment out of these simple combos, and honestly, it kinda works. It's pretty fun trying to find clever ways to shave off time, like using as little multi-hit moves as possible, or using things like Spark and Blast and Vanish to interrupt long animations. Doing things like this to remove even hundreds of a millisecond off your timer can be a very engaging process for those who are willing to achieve the best time. In fact, at the time when I recorded most of the footage used in this video, I was actually ranked number 1 for the fastest times overall in the game's combo trials. But that was years ago, and I'm nowhere near that rank anymore. Nor would I want to be. I do have to admit that grinding for the fastest times was not very fun, and it's something I honestly would not recommend going out of your way to do. Like I said earlier, going for the fastest times in some of these trials can be very engaging, especially if you're using techniques like sparking to try to find your own unique and speedy routes. However, that is unfortunately not the case for a majority of this game's trials. A lot of the missions presented to you in Dragon Ball are really as simple as mashing the light button a certain number of times or performing a singular special move on its own. And when the game asks you to try to perform those tasks as quickly as possible, it can be extremely tiresome. I imagine watching this footage of me repeatedly resetting this mission just to do a single super over and over again is pretty obnoxious, right? You're not going to believe me when I say that it's not much better when you're playing it either. I mean, it's pretty fair to say that going for the fastest times would require a good amount of resetting and replaying in order to shave off as much time as possible. But applying that playstyle to trials as simple as these turns this admittedly novel concept into a boring and frustrating one. If you go out of your way to try and get the fastest time for some of these trials, you'll be spending about 15 to 20 minutes per character, and in case you forgot, that is several times longer than it should be taking you to finish these trials. I can commend the guys over at ArcSys for trying to inject more enjoyment out of Dragon Ball's combo trials, but this wasn't the right way to go about it. Having the players spend 5 minutes just mashing L isn't interesting. It's mind-numbing. There's definitely potential in the idea though. Giving your players a reason to revisit a game's simple combo trials is an interesting angle to go. Like, maybe you could reward the player with extra money if they went above and beyond and added in more moves to the trials presented to them, or maybe the game could rank you based on how much damage you squeeze out of each combo. That would encourage a level of creativity that hasn't really been seen in a lot of fighting game combo trials and gives players a more tangible reason to stick with these simple trials, instead of granting the player an arbitrary ranking based on how fast they did them. In fact, Granblue Fantasy Versus actually kind of does something like this. So within Granblue's mission mode and match tutorials, not only does the game give you a simple goal to achieve in order to finish the mission, you're also given a number of side objectives that you can go for. Things like only using motion inputs instead of relying on the game's simple special move inputs, achieving a certain amount of damage, things of that nature. And the more objectives you complete, the higher rank you achieve for that particular mission. While the ranking isn't super important and doesn't really mean anything, I still like what ArcSys was going for here. This is a more engaging method of getting more out of these simple missions in Dragon Ball's time trials. These side objectives require the player to experiment with each character within these trials in order to try to meet some of these requirements. The game doesn't show you how to deal 3,000 or more damage in this particular punish scenario, and there's no demo for it either. You have to figure that out for yourself if you want to go for it. You could just do a basic jump-in combo and be fine, but by letting the player know that they could squeeze some more damage out of it with just a little finesse, the player will feel more rewarded once they finally figure out how to do so. Again, while these objectives aren't the hardest thing in the world, I think they're a step in the right direction as to ways that fighting game devs could make trial mode or mission mode more worthwhile for players. I don't know, I'm sure there's a ton of more interesting ideas you could do. All the more reason why I think this is an untapped field for fighting games to delve further into. Now, when you get right down to it, every game's version of combo trials is pretty similar and straightforward. Pick a character and perform a series of combos that increase in difficulty as you go on until you complete them all. So what I want to do instead is highlight some of the more interesting features and missions that certain games use to make their combo trials stand out among others. Guilty Gear Xrd combo trials start by giving you a rundown of your character's move list before introducing you to the trials proper. There's also 2 sets of trials per character, one for basic combos and one for advanced combos, which can only be unlocked after finishing your character's basic trials. Xrd will also go out of its way to explain certain concepts to the players that are vital to complete in certain trials. If a combo requires something like a super jump install or burst bait or any sort of weird tech, the game will put up a text box telling you how to perform these maneuvers. Not only is it cool to see the game utilize these techniques for challenging combo trials, it's also great that the game tells you exactly how to do them so you're not fumbling around trying to figure out how to perform them yourself. I'm all for discovering neat options that a character has and all that, but that's what training mode is for, or dust loop. And if combo trials like these are asking me to perform some of these maneuvers that I'm unfamiliar with, then at least tell me how to do them then and there. More on that later. Much later. Fighting EX Layer and Persona 4 Arena both have very interesting missions within their combo trials. While a majority of both games' trials are just a matter of completing the displayed combo, occasionally they'll instead give you an objective. Something like keep the enemy airborne for a certain amount of time, do a certain amount of damage, perform this specific move a certain number of times within a combo, etc. These types of trials are usually the last missions for characters in P4AU, but they can appear whenever in Fexel. These types of missions are unique in that they don't necessarily have one method of completing, at least theoretically. As long as you eventually achieve the goal the game asks you to do, you'll pass the trial. By not giving the player a specific recipe to follow, it forces them to come up with their own routes and experiment with that character even more to try to complete whatever trial they're faced with. I know I was just complaining that I don't prefer when combo trials ask you to experiment new techniques within them, but in this case it's like the ultimate test, especially in P4AU's case. The game showed you a great number of combos to practice and get good at. Now it's asking you to put that knowledge to the test. When the player figures out for themselves how to complete these missions and they create their own combo within the game's trials, that is a remarkably satisfying feeling and serves as a nice reward for all the hard work it took to get there. Admittedly though, this feeling is kind of mitigated by the fact that P4AU, in its original release on PS3 at least, has demos for these trials that you can watch and just copy in order to complete them in case you don't feel like finding the solution yourself. And to be fair, I guess there's nothing stopping you from watching someone on YouTube complete Fexel's trials so that you know how to complete them. It's not bad obviously, if you need assistance don't hesitate to ask, but when the game gives you a blank canvas, create your own piece, and also gives you the option to just trace someone else's, it feels a little hollow. However, as I implied earlier, the ability to watch the demos for these specific trials in P4AU was taken out for the modern re-release on PS4 and PC, so I respect Arxis for encouraging the player to figure these out on their own. Though I do think giving the players some hints or tips for these trials would be nice as well, still these kinds of trials are interesting and I wish more games used them. If you want to talk about positive feelings and content in a trial mode, then let me tell you about Under Night. Uni 1 and 2's trial modes are some of the best I personally experienced out of any fighting game I've played. Not just for how comprehensive each character's trials are to understand and adapt to, but also for just the amount of options these modes have to make understanding these trials even easier. Uni structures its combo trials into 4 difficulty sections: beginner, intermediate, expert, and finally veteran. These trials start you off with very simple strings and hit confirms that ease you into the character's toolkit very quickly. As the difficulty goes into intermediate and expert, even though the game is asking more out of you, these trials still rely on the strings and moves you used way back in the beginner section. The game is steadily building muscle memory for you throughout these trials so that when you get to the real hard missions in veteran difficulty, you feel more prepared since the game's ingrained a lot of these strings and enders into you by then. A lot of players might say that the game's trials don't really start until you reach the veteran difficulty, as that's where you're going to find a lot of practical B&Bs and quarter combos. However, all of the missions that came before do a great job at establishing what you should be doing with your character, and it gives Uni's combo trials the best difficulty curve out of any other fighting game, I believe. And the veteran missions are no joke, absolutely. I mean, you should have seen my face when I saw Yuzu's missions for the first time. Good lord, what is going on there? And believe it or not, Uni 2 actually added in additional veteran trials for every character after the game's launch, and these missions can be insanely precise. If you can clear all of these with your character, give yourself a medal, because god damn. Even though a lot of them look intimidating, most of them aren't too taxing once you understand what's actually going on. The game's not asking you to perform one frame lengths for most of these trials, just that you understand the rhythm of the combo and to learn from your mistakes, which the game neatly points out to you every time you fail. In fact, Uni offers so many damn options within the trial modes that it's almost overwhelming. You got demos, input history, the option to automatically restart when you fail a trial, the option to move on to the next trial or repeat the one you just did, explanations for each trial that not only detail what each icon used for the combo recipe means, but also elaborate on what these combos should be used for, or even how to perform specific techniques more easily. You can lower the battle speed to get a better understanding of when to time certain buttons, or to better understand what's going on in the trial itself. You can choose to do the trials on the player 2 side to help aid in muscle memory, because who the hell practices in the player 2 side normally? There's this mission assistance mode that lets you record a certain amount of the trial's demo, then lets you control the rest of it in case you only need to practice a specific part of the combo without having to do the whole thing. Damn! To see this many options within a game's trial mode is impressive, and it really goes to show that French Bread really put in a lot of effort to make these trials as easy to digest as possible. And if that wasn't enough, there's also these tactics challenges that detail each character's strengths and weaknesses to help highlight things like which buttons are good and which moves are invincible. While this section is nice, I do think it's a bit strange how in Uni 1 these are at the very end of a character's trials, like after the hardest missions and all that. I mean, it's not like you have to complete all the trials in order to even access this section. You can pick any mission in any order you want. But it seems off to explain a lot of these moves after going through like 30 or 40 trials with that character. Thankfully, Uni 2 placed these tactics notes before the trials proper, which makes way more sense. Overall though, Uni's combo trials are probably the best out of any other fighting game I can think of. Not only do the missions have a satisfying difficulty curve, but the devs put in a plethora of options to make your experience even more comfortable. Some of you might look at all these options and find it a little overbearing, like maybe you don't need to have this many features for what's ostensibly a side mode for a fighting game. However, giving the player ways to tailor their experience so that they have an easier time is never a bad idea. And trust me, when games don't have some of these features, you can feel it. and it can be frustrating. Street Fighter 4 is probably one of the earliest examples of modern fighting game combo trials, being an extra mode introduced in Vanilla's Challenge mode in 2009 and eventually expanded into its Super update in 2010. I know Street Fighter EX Plus Alpha is probably one of the earliest fighting games to have combo trials, but I don't own that game, and from what I've seen, the trials are handled very similar to the way Fexel does it. Anyway, the main thing you'll immediately realize when booting up SF4's trials are the lack of options the game gives you. There's no input display, no demos, no button to automatically restart the trial, no way to enable notation display for the combo recipes, none of that. It's just you, the trials presented to you, and the same training stage and music track playing for the whole ride. Again, I'm willing to cut SF4 a little bit of slack because it was one of the earliest modern fighting games to do combo trials, and just because it doesn't have a lot of these quality of life features that future games would use doesn't completely invalidate this mode altogether. But it's a lot of the little things that build up over time that makes SF4's trials a little tedious to go back to. For starters, every time you complete a trial, whether it be doing a special move or an elaborate corner combo, you have to sit and wait for the game to congratulate you and watch your character do their victory pose. Every time. I can respect the game for trying to pat me on the back for a job well done. This just takes way too long. You can actually skip this animation and just move on to the next trial, but if you do that, then the game won't register the trial as being completed, so you need to watch these animations at least once for every mission you clear with every character. It just makes these trials take way longer than they need to when you tack on these victory animations for all 24 trials per character. Not to mention, it just feels a little silly for the early trials where you're just performing special moves. Congratulating me for throwing a fireball doesn't feel as rewarding as congratulating me for nailing a few one-frame links in a sequence. I should also point out that this was much more annoying in vanilla, since not only did the animation take longer, but you also had to back out of each hard mission after clearing them and then select the next mission yourself as opposed to just advancing automatically. Now granted, there's less missions to do in vanilla compared to Super onwards, but Christ, that sounds like a slog. The game also doesn't automatically corner the opponent even when the trial itself only works in the corner, meaning you have to dash like mad and corner them yourself every time you reset the trial or end up repositioning yourself somehow. Once the trial starts up, you might assume it would work mid-screen since that's where the game starts you off at, only to find out that you need to have the enemy cornered, meaning you gotta spend more time getting them over there to attempt the trial proper. And if you're not a fan of links, you're not gonna like most of these trials. I mean, SF4 is pretty notorious for its one-frame links, but honestly, I don't mind their use here since they really were a big part of SF4's system, along with focus attacks and FADCs, which also get plenty of use in these trials. I appreciate how challenging a lot of these trials can get, as it leads to a greater feeling of satisfaction once you complete them. I just wish they were a little clearer on certain things. Like if you need to input an ultra right after a character's super jump, the game won't tell you how to do this. Or how about situations like this, where you try to cancel it into a special move after chaining a few light normals but nothing happens. Turns out you have to actually wait a few frames and link that last light normal before you can freely cancel into a special move. The game doesn't explain any of this to you, it just throws you into it and expects you to figure it out on your own. Having the game force you to try to solve these problems on your own, along with the other issues I mentioned earlier, make SF4's trials feel extremely draining and tiring, at least the first time through. But hey, even with SF4's one-frame links and FADCs, I still wouldn't consider them to be the strictest trials I've gone through. No, that honor goes to Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Now, I don't think Marvel 3's trials are strict in the sense that they're super difficult or require hard-to-nail links in order to complete them or anything like that. In fact, most of these trials are relatively straightforward and easy once you realize what the game wants you to do. However, Marvel 3's trials do have one quirk about them that makes them one of the most frustrating to go through out of any other game. When the game displays a combo for you to do, you need to perform it exactly as they show it. And I mean exactly. If you try to add an additional normal, special, super, air dash, even if it keeps the combo going, your entire attempt is invalidated and you need to start from the beginning of the trial. In every other game that features combo trials, the game doesn't fail you until you drop the combo, meaning that players could find their own ways to complete the trials or to try to squeeze more damage out of them as long as they hit all the notes the game wants them to hit. In Marvel 3 though, either you do it the exact way they want you to do, or you fail, no questions asked. This even applies to different versions of the same move. If the game wants you to do the air version of special move or super, even though the ground version would work just as well, you'll fail because you didn't do the air version specifically. This simple quirk of these trials goes a long way in stifling the creativity of the player in case they want to go off the beaten path and figure something out on their own. And in Marvel 3's case, that's extra damning since Marvel 3 is one of the most flexible and open-ended fighting games out there. Each of these characters have a variety of different ways to combo their opponent, and it only gets more engaging when you add in things like assist and the like. But when the game basically says, yeah, no, do it like this, it's way better, it feels like it's going against the game's own battle system. It's discouraging players from trying new things and punishing them for going off the beaten path. So the game trains you to only do each mission specifically the way it tells you to. Except for the times when it doesn't, since there are a few missions in this game that require techniques that the game doesn't tell you about but still expects you to realize. There are a number of missions in the game that require you to perform a special move or super after hitting the opponent with either a stand S or a jump cancelable move. If you try to input the super immediately after stand S, nothing happens, even though that's how it's listed in the combo recipe, recipe. The game doesn't tell you that you need to tie your knee the motion of the super after hitting the stand S in order for it to come out, even though it's required in order to complete the trial. How does this combo system punish experimentation by forcing the player to only complete missions the way they specifically wanted, while simultaneously asking the player to experiment and figure things out for concepts the game doesn't feel like elaborating on? It's contradictory and very irritating. The only reason I can think of as to why the game fails you immediately if you mess up a trial is because of X Factor. The devs probably didn't want players to cheese their way through certain trials by activating X Factor midway through a combo, but joke's on them, X Factor can still be used to make a lot of these missions way easier. And then if that's the case, why didn't they just disable the use of X Factor for certain missions? I mean, it's not like it was impossible to do, they disabled TACs and THCs for the trials after all. Heck, Marvel Infinite would go on to disable Tag and Stones for missions that didn't need them. If they just turned off X Factor for the missions that didn't need it, then not only would the devs have ensured the difficulty for certain trials, but they also potentially could have removed that instant fail stipulation, letting players actually explore other means of completing each mission. You know, I think it wouldn't be as big of a deal if the trials for each character actually went out of the way to show off a lot of the unique and interesting combo routes that these characters could take. And honestly, some of them kinda do. Don't get me wrong, these aren't the most optimal combos for every single character. It'd be unrealistic to expect that out of these trials. After all, Marvel 3 has had over 15 years for players to figure out the coolest and cheapest ways to squeeze more damage with each character. Despite that though, some of these trials do demonstrate a lot of neat things that you can do with each character, like Chun's toe tap air dash, Morgan's fly unfly, Viper's thunder knuckle cancels, etc. Unfortunately, most of these combos are saved for each character's 9th and 10th missions. They're final ones, meaning the player has to make their way through a bunch of missions that feel kinda samey with each character up until then, since most characters' early missions only require them to do special moves and basic magic series combos. You could argue games like Under Night do this too, with how the early missions for each character are pretty homogenous before getting to the very challenging trials, but at least in Uni's case, they have a good number of combos within those veteran trials that really go in depth on what sets each character apart. In Marvel 3 though, each character only gets 10 trials, and the trials where each character gets to do unique and interesting combo routes is only limited to like maybe 2 or 3 max. But hey, at least the game does go out of its way to give each of these characters a couple of trials that really lets them highlight their unique qualities. Unless you're Phoenix Wright. How do none of these trials teach the player how to gather evidence or go into turnabout mode? That's literally his entire game plan. I'd also like to take a bit to highlight someone who's attempting to rectify these trials with a mod. Eternal Yoshi on Twitter has posted clips of custom combo trials that are way more practical than the ones in the base game. Now obviously this would be a massive undertaking, but I'd love to see how this project eventually turns out, and the clips they posted are very promising. I'll have a link to their Twitter in the description. Give them a follow and best of luck on their work. Now there's one more game whose combo trials I like to highlight, and that's KOF 13. Now KOF 13's trials are probably the most infamous out of any other fighting game out there. In fact, I think more fighting game players recognize KOF 13 more for its trials rather than anything about the game itself, which is kind of depressing. If you were to find people on YouTube talk about this game, you're likely to hear that KOF 13 has some of the hardest combos to pull off and how most of these combos are impossible with thumbnails that show off the most insane looking combo recipes that seem to go on for ages. However, saying KOF 13's trials are hard isn't really doing the game justice. I mean, don't get me wrong, these trials are definitely tough. There's a reason people talk about them. I'm not going to act like some elitist saying that you just need to get good in order to fully understand what's going on in these trials. No, I think the problem with KOF 13's trials lies more in its presentation of each trial rather than the trials themselves. So KOF 13 has a unique drive cancel system, where by spending one stock of this drive gauge, you can cancel a special move into another special move, and by going into hyperdrive mode, you can freely cancel special moves into each other or go into your supers for a limited time. This is a mechanic that really sets 13 apart from other KOF games aside from 2002, since there aren't too many games that you cancel your special moves into each other, and it can lead to some very creative combo structures. Naturally, since the drive system is 13's defining mechanic, its combo trials utilize them as well, though I don't think the game really does the best job showing you. So 13's combo recipes only bother showing you the notations for each move, which is great, and considering the combos the game expects you to do, it's a blessing. However, when the game wants you to cancel a special move into another special move, it'll just place both moves right next to each other on the recipe, without explicitly relaying that the player needs to perform a drive cancel. This wouldn't be so much of an issue if not for the fact that a number of characters in the roster have special moves that naturally juggle into other special moves without the need to cancel them, like Kyo's upkicks or Yuri's side-hop. So when the game wants you to perform a combo that requires both linking special moves and canceling special moves, it doesn't bother clarifying which is which on the recipe itself. The game just wants you to perform the combo yourself and figure it out from there. Obviously, the demos can help out here as well, letting the player see exactly how each trial will play out. But the player shouldn't be required to watch these demos just to understand what's going on in the trial. I've already praised games like Uni for going out of the way to create icons for its recipes that let players know when they should be delaying certain moves, charging certain normals, all that kind of stuff. But since 13's trials don't do that, it can leave the player confused once they read the recipe. Also, most of 13's harder trials are long enough that the whole recipe can't fit on the screen without pulling up the trial list in the pause menu. This is another element that does make things slightly harder to go back to, especially when games like Grindy manage to fit their whole combos at the top of the screen. You get used to it with enough practice, but constantly pulling up the trial list just to see the end of the combo you're screwing up always feels a little bad, but to be fair, lots of fighting games have this problem. It's not exclusive to 13. All I think they had to do was create a symbol for drive cancels and super cancels, and that would have gone a long way to making these trials easier to understand. In fact, there actually is a version of KOF 13 that fixes this particular presentation issue. The mobile version! Yes, not only is there an official mobile version of KOF 13, but it also has combo trials along with recipes that actually have dedicated symbols for drive cancels and super cancels. As unbelievable as it sounds, this mobile version does a better job at letting the player know what they should be doing more than the console version. That's pretty funny. And as a side note, the trials found in the mobile version are significantly easier than those found in KOF 13 proper, probably because they didn't want you to perform insanely precise combos with nothing but a touchscreen. If you can, I'd honestly give this port a shot. It's free and good for a laugh. Also, as a side note, City of the Wolves is another SNK game that uses special-to-special cancels for their combos, and they don't have dedicated icons for those cancels in their trials. However, I still find it easier to read since the recipe is displayed vertically, and combos in that game are not nearly as complex as the ones in KOF 13. Just thought I'd quickly compare them since they are a bit similar. Unfortunately, not even the mobile port can fix the one other presentation issue I have with KOF 13's trials: input shortcuts. You see, as you make your way through some of these trials, the game will ask you to perform certain inputs that, try as you might, don't exactly work the way they're shown to you. Take Kyo for example. The game wants you to cancel his DP into his Orochi super, which requires going from a Shoryuken motion into a quarter circle back, half circle forward motion. Trying to do this sequence as it's shown to you won't work, since you'll end up getting Kyo's other super instead, which is done by doing a double QCF motion. So how do you get this cancel to work, you ask? Turns out, if you perform his DP with a half circle back forward punch, and then go into a QCF punch, you'll get the Orochi super after the DP. KOF actually has a lot of input shortcuts like these throughout the series, and to be honest, they're very cool and handy once you get a feel for them. However, in the context of these combo trials, they are a nightmare for the first time player. The game gives no hints toward performing these shortcuts within the trials themselves, or anywhere in the game as far as I can tell. Not even the in-game demos help here much since there's no input display, so you can't really see what inputs the game expects you to do in order to complete some of these trials. This problem also extends to the handful of characters whose cancel windows are affected by hyperdrive mode. If K- tries to cancel his DP into Ein Trigger, more often than not, he's going to go right into Super unless you have insanely precise hands. But if you're in Hyperdrive mode, all you have to do is hit forward and punch after his DP, and you'll always get Ein Trigger. Hyperdrive shortcuts like this are also present throughout a number of these trials, and the game doesn't bother telling you how they work. It just expects you to experiment and see what works yourself. Look, I get the impression that these trials were geared more towards KOF veterans that were likely more familiar with a lot of these shortcuts and tricks, but you can't assume that everybody knows about them. Not every player is going to attempt to perform a half circle back forward punch motion for a DP and then cancel that into super. That's just not very intuitive even if you understand why it works after the fact. If a player keeps failing a particular sequence in the trial even though they're performing the inputs exactly as they're presented to them, then it's going to leave the player frustrated and confused. Because of this issue, I think for most players, outside resources and videos are necessary in order to complete a lot of these trials. There were plenty of missions that I found were totally impossible for looking at videos that demonstrated ways to make them feel more manageable. How to cancel charge moves into each other, Tiger Grenying certain supers, when to time specific links, all of that. If the game is going to require the use of specific input shortcuts for its trials, then it should also provide a way for the player to know how to perform them within the game itself. When Rev 2 required the player to perform advanced techniques, it would go out of its way to tell you how to do them, whereas this game doesn't. I know KOF 13 came out first, but I don't think it's an excuse. I'm not arguing against the use of input shortcuts or hyperdrive shortcuts. Again, I think they're actually super sick and very useful not just in this game but other KOF games in general. But because these combo trials don't tell you how to perform them, it can leave the first time player annoyed. Again, just the simple inclusion of an input display for the demos alone would have done wonders, but as it is, these trials can appear impossible without prior knowledge. However, despite these major issues present within KOF 13's trials, despite the headaches they've caused me due to how unclear some of them can be, I still find these trials to be some of the most fun to complete and revisit. Once you've figured out what the game's asking you to do, it's very engaging tackling the hardest trials that gave you such a hard time. Again, I only believe 13's trials are perceived as difficult due to the game's own system mechanics and how these trials don't do the best job representing those mechanics. But damn man, some of these trials are so fun to do, especially characters like K-, Kyo, Leona, and Duolong. In fact, with exception to 2 specific missions, I've completed every trial for every character in the game. Why? Because I'm crazy. And because these combos feel so good to do, they're like a nice workout for your hands considering how often you're going to be performing special cancels. When you get the hang of it, each character's trials could be finished within 5 minutes, which is very fulfilling to do. But getting to that point for KOF 13's trials requires research, experimentation, and most importantly, patience. These trials are also the epitome of execution checks. There is no way you're landing most of these combos in an actual match. Most matches in 13 are spent doing hyper hop jump CD and trying to get a confirm off of that. Landing deep jump ins like these in the corner is not really ever going to happen. But hey, it doesn't stop these trials from being pretty fun in my opinion. So why did I bother going on this needlessly long and meticulous examination of several different combo trials for a bunch of different fighting games? Well, because as I said, I'm crazy. And because I genuinely get a lot of enjoyment out of combo trials. Seeing what the devs set up for you in terms of what they might see as the most challenging or practical combos is fascinating, and something I always look forward to whenever a new fighting game is released. It's cool seeing what features and options are included to make each game's trials more interesting, especially ones that help to enlighten me on a game's mechanics or combo structure. Nowadays, combo trials have kind of garnered a reputation for being arbitrary combo challenges whose difficulty is exaggerated in order to get clicks for YouTube videos. However, boiling down an entire single-player mode to that simple conclusion isn't telling the whole story. There are plenty of games that do very unique and interesting things with their trials. They can inform the player about executing certain moves, they can reward the player for thinking outside the box, or they can present combos that could potentially create a spark of creativity within the player, leading them to further experiment with that character. Arguably one of the best and most important aspects of a fighting game is how it lets the player express themselves while they're playing, through the characters they pick and the way they compose themselves in neutral. Combos are also a huge factor when it comes to letting the player express themselves, whether they'd rather go for something reliable and easy to land, or hard to nail for more damage. If any future fighting games can help demonstrate unique and interesting ways through its combo trials to help foster and sustain that creativity, then that's all I can really ask for. I'd love to see more fighting games try to reward players for trying to go above and beyond for combo trials, similar to what Granblue does. And tools like the Combo Maker and Guilty Gear Strive are an excellent method to showcase damaging combos in set play that any player can create and upload. Even if future fighting games don't really make any significant strides for what they wanted combo trials to do, I'll still be willing to try them out, as long as there's a decent challenge. Also, the only two trials I didn't do for KOF 13 were for Ash Crimson and his crazy install super. My pad playing hands just can't get used to it. I like these trials, but screw these trials.